Welcome back, everybody, to Photography Tips and Tricks, your show for gear tips, inspiration, anything you need to take your photography to the next level. My name is RC, and I'm here with Mr. PeachPit. What's up?
How you doing?
Good.
Glad we could get together.
We get a little double duo action.
I like it.
It's always one or the other, but we get to spend some time kind of doing this together. I think it's nice. But listen, mainly, I'm going to be sitting here just running kind of camera duty, because this is a question that we get quite a bit when we're talking about things on the show. A lot of the times what happens is people turn around and go, well, I want to be able to take myself to the next level. How do I take myself to the next level? Do I need to be able to switch myself to manual to go to the next level? And I'm always very hesitant to be able to talk about that, because I'm like, manual is nice. You want to be able to have complete control over something, but there are different modes in the camera that can help you get a little bit more creative with your exposures, specifically aperture priority and shutter priority. And I know that you've done some stuff in both different types of mode, and you also shoot in manual mode.
Right.
So I figured, why not get the best person out here to just talk to us a little bit about the modes, and then we can go through that just step by step. We've got a whole bunch of illustrations here too.
Well, and I think that there's a lot of information out there. You'll hear photographers go, oh, well, when you get good, you'll shoot only in manual.
Right.
That's the where you need to get. If you can shoot manual, then you got it all made. And to be honest, I shoot manual when I need to, but it's actually not my go-to setting. I actually start out with aperture priority, and I shoot probably 80-85% of my time there. And so do a lot of folks that I would consider pros as well.
Right.
And there's a reason behind it.
Right. And a lot of the times I usually the analogy that I like to give people is, you drive a car, right, to get to a location, and it's like most cars, most phones, most everything have a GPS, right? So would you use a GPS in a car? Well, yeah. Would you use a GPS on your phone? Yeah. Before, there wasn't any GPSs. You didn't have to. Now, it doesn't mean that you're more of a man or more of a woman, less than a man. If you don't use a GPS, use the technology for what you have, and then notice that there's going to be times when you can't use it.
Right.
And you've got some great examples of that. So let's go ahead and start first with aperture priority. Talk to me a little bit about what aperture priority is.
All right. Well, I was talking to a friend about this, a good friend of mine, Scotty, and he was asking me the very question. He's getting into photography, and he wanted to know, what's the deal with aperture priority and why would we be interested in it? And so we're sitting there on the porch, and I just picked up my camera and I said, okay, click. Here's a shot of you at f2.8.
Right.
Now, if we go to the next slide, we're going to see that I then just made a quick switch, and I said, here's a shot at f5.6.
Okay.
And if you start to toggle back and forth, notice the background, and especially look at the railing and the trees in the back. They're so much creamier with the f2.8 than the 5.6. He becomes more of the focus than all the noise and stuff in the background, that visual noise.
So by taking that number and making that number smaller, you're making the hole bigger, but then it also makes the depth of field a little bit more shallower.
It shortens the depth of field.
Okay.
And that's where you get kind of more of that cinematic look, and that's why you spend the money for these cameras that have the bigger hole in
smaller
number, because you can get that creamier background because it's a shallower depth of field.
Okay, so then if I want to make sure that this is not necessarily, this section right here is not competing,
right?
You just make the number smaller and it kind of blurs it out. Now this gets the focus of attention just on this person. Now is 2.8 the smallest number that you can go to?
Not necessarily, depending on your lens. Also, if I wanted to show everything, sometimes for landscapes and stuff like that, I want to go the opposite direction. I want everything to be clear and in focus. So I'm going to rack it the other way. So that's where AV priority comes in. It sets the scene and the mood of the image. It lets you have control of how the image is going to look.
Right, so you lock it at 5.6, and then what's changing there is the shutter speed. The shutter speed changes to compensate for an exposure that you would make at 5.6.
Right, for the amount of light and everything going on. Let me show you why I would use aperture priority most of the time. Here's an image I used with a different lens that had the aperture of 1.8. This means it's a very shallow depth of field.
Smaller number, bigger hole.
Smaller number, bigger hole. But the reason why I like this is it suddenly becomes about them, their eyes, and it's a very intimate image that's taken with a shallow depth of field.
Okay.
This would have an entirely different look and feel if I'd shot this at a bigger setting, a larger number, which would mean more stuff was in focus.
Okay.
So I'm always, when you're looking at buying lenses, they talk about, oh, it's a fast glass, it's a lower number. It's the ability to get to those lower numbers and have more control over the depth of field.
Okay.
And that's why I use it for these, show the next one, same type of deal. If I had a higher number, say I shot this at 5.6, the aisle, the background, the rest of the church would be more prominent in this than it is there. So I'm able to paint a mood by changing my aperture.
Right, and now having that bigger hole lets more light in, which means the shutter speed can be a little bit higher in some of these instances as well.
And then I don't need a flash. I'm able to do things because it's allowing light to come in faster. So I love to be able to say, I want this kind of look. I need as much light as possible. I'm going to stay down here. If you're paying for fast glass, you tend to want to be down there at those lower numbers to get this kind of look.
Right, and one of the things that I think is really tricky though with shooting fast, like super fast, like 1.4 or 1.2, is that the shallow depth of field is so shallow.
You can miss a lot.
You miss a lot. I mean, there's a lot of instances where you try to do a portrait of a person, one eye's in focus and the other eye isn't.
Photography is always that compromise. You got to go, man, if I get it right, it's awesome. Or I can get them all almost right and have heartbreak at the end of it. So you got to build your skill so you know when you're getting it and when you're not.
Right. So okay. So that covers aperture priority. Lock it in one specific section. It varies the shutter.
Yep.
But there are instances where you're going to want to be able to lock the shutter. And when you lock the shutter, the aperture is going to go up and down. We'll talk about that when we come back from break.
Get the world's best photography, lighting, and Photoshop training at Photoshop World. Here's the top 10 reasons you should attend. It's 3 non-stop days of real-world training where you can get personal attention and unlimited access to the world's top instructors in Photoshop and photography. When you attend, you'll have chances to experience hands-on live shoots and workshops, outrageous after-hours parties and events, and hundreds of classes for all skill levels, along with dozens of opportunities to network with other attendees. In-depth, one-on-one portfolio reviews from industry professionals and see new cutting-edge technology. Plus, you can even earn continuing education and graduate-level credits from attending. This is the must-attend conference for photographers and Photoshop users. Use the promo code to get an extra $50 off. Photoshop World, the world's best Photoshop and photography conference.
Welcome back, everybody, to Photography Tips and Tricks. RC here. I'm with the incomparable Mr. Pete Collins. What's going on, man?
Word.
Now, we're talking a little bit about shutter priority, aperture priority, and manual, and how to be able to use these settings, and more importantly, when you would want to use these settings. So, Pete, you've talked to us a little bit about aperture priority, where we lock the aperture and the shutter changes.
Right.
Are there times when we would be using shutter priority, where we keep the shutter kind of fixed?
Definitely. And the way I like to think about it is aperture priority when you want to change the depth of field and affect the depth of field. Shutter priority when you want to affect motion, either display it or freeze it. And that's where the shutter priority comes into play. I use this mostly when I'm shooting sports or certain environments where something is moving. And I want to capture that movement or I want to eliminate it. For instance, here's a shot on the computer of a dancer. She's jumping through the air and I want to freeze her, but I don't want to freeze her completely where she's just hanging there. So I found kind of that sweet spot of 1/200th of a second where I could freeze her mostly, but we've got a little action with the foot and the arms and stuff like that so that it shows a little bit of what's going on.
All right, and that was generally when people shoot dance, they'll say something along the lines of like over 300th of a second, like 320, 400 is something that gives you perfectly frozen stuff. But I thought that was really good in that you had those edge sections. I do a lot of dance shooting.
It helps if your wife is a dancer.
Yes, and so here's a shot that I did of dance where you have most of the stuff in focus, but you always want to get just a little tiny bit of the edges of the feet kind of in focus or blurry just a little bit to be able to signify that there's a little bit of motion. So in that, you've programmed that in. You've said, I want 200th of a second, gives you a little bit of a drag,
Yeah,
makes it for
you
a
kind of
good-
have to figure out how fast the subject is actually moving and kind of trigger in what that speed is to get it. There's a sweet spot to it.
Right.
So there is some working to it, but that's when you definitely want to use your shutter priority to make sure to deal with motion. Here's another one, especially when I'm shooting very fast things like motorcycle racing or whatever. Here I've shot this at 1/1250th of a second. Now here I've frozen it, but I would actually, if I got a chance to shoot this again, I would lower it down and I would try to do more panning.
Yeah, I was going to say, what would happen if I were to shoot this at 1/200th of a second?
You'd get a lot of blur.
He's moving.
Unless you're going to pan, and we've talked about that in previous episodes.
Right.
If I get down low enough and I can pan with it, he's sharp, everything else is blurry.
Right, but this is a good example of showing how you've just stopped it.
I froze the action. The problem is he could really be resting on his knee just parked right there.
Right.
So that's where you've got to realize that, yes, you want to use shutter priority, but that's where you've got to find the sweet spot as well. And that's where learning what the different speeds and the different objects are to get the look you want.
Right, and so in some of these sections, like I used a 30-second shutter priority to be able to smooth out a lot of the water that we have here.
Right.
When waves of water are kind of going in and out, smoothing it out gives me a good chance to be able to do that.
Waterfalls are another great opportunity to do that. You want to have it slow enough so that it captures that water and turns it creamy and smooth.
Right, usually also light streaking. So to have some lights kind of moving around in those sections, a lot of the times you want to slow that shutter speed down so that you have those lights. But there are instances where you want to be able to switch to manual.
Right.
Right. So when do you find yourself switching to manual mode?
Well, when I need the best of both worlds. I want to be able to shoot at a certain shutter speed, but I also want to have the depth of field that I want.
Okay.
For instance, a lot of times indoor sporting events, or even outdoor sporting events at night or whatever, I'm finding that situations are changing, but I want to keep the general feel of what's going on there. I want to make sure that the person's lit well enough, but I'm taking into consideration that parts of the field may be darker than other parts, and what would happen if I left it in one of the other priorities, my exposures would go up and down, and it would look a little bit different. This way, I find the sweet spot and I put it in manual, and then I just shoot the rest of the night with it in manual, knowing that each time it's going to have that same correct exposure.
Now you talked about finding a sweet spot. Do you just guess that sweet spot, or what do you?
No, I cheat. I'm lazy. What I will do is I will go to aperture priority and I will find what the exposure is with that at, say, f2.8, and I'll figure out what it's going to be so that I can get that look and also the correct shutter speed by dialing up my ISO till I get that sweet spot, and then I just switch over to manual and plug in those settings.
That way, at that point, you know it's not changing. It stays exactly the way you want it. Cool. That's a good one here. So you have another picture here.
Another time that you might want to use manual, which I use it all the time, is when I'm controlling the light. I've got a light setup on this, so I'm keeping consistent lighting throughout it. So I don't want little things change where I'm focusing or whatever, that it's going to fluctuate the look of it. I'm going to nail it and dial it down every time because I'm controlling the light. It's not going to change.
Okay, wonderful.
And here's one. You talked about panoramas just 2 shows ago, last episode. And this is where you definitely want to do it manual, because here's the difference. If I shot this panorama at AV priority, what would happen is, because of clouds, grass, whatever's in the background, what it's metering, it could fluctuate the exposure. So you get what I call banding in your panoramas.
Right.
Once I get the right exposure for one, I set it immediately to manual and shoot each one of them consistently the same way to get that same exposure.
And
all
it'll
the way
eliminate
across.
these kinds of problems that we have right here. The last section, we have something here.
Yeah, this is where it all kind of comes into play. You can get so used to shooting like AV priority or whatever. This is where it both helped me and bit me in the butt. I was shooting this concert and I immediately said, oh, I'm going to shoot AV priority because I want to do f2.8 and I want to do it auto ISO, let it take care of the light fluctuation or whatever. The problem was I didn't set my minimal shutter speed, and so a lot of my images were blurry because of the motion of the singers. Sometimes it worked out great, like I've got his hands moving or when he was stationary, but I killed a lot of shots because I wasn't paying attention to my shutter speed. And so I've got these great shots and everybody's moving just slightly through it. Right. And that's where I should have set it to manual, dialed in the look I wanted, the shutter speed, the f-stop, and I was good to go for the rest of the concert. Right. And that's where it bites you in the butt if you're not aware.
Now, we've talked a little bit about auto ISO and what to do with auto ISO. If you guys want to see something that is focused specifically on auto ISO, send us some feedback. We'd be more than happy to do an entire show on it with somebody that I think you would really love, Mr. Brad Moore himself.
Yep.
So this is kind of like a quick section where we want to be like, get Brad Moore, get him in here. Brad's great at that kind of stuff. Pete, thanks so much, man.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for that. That's really cool. Now, talk to you about a couple of different things. We're about a week away from Photoshop World. So photoshopworld.com, April 8th through the 10th at the Cobb Galleria Center in Atlanta. Guys, it is limited seating. Make sure that you go to photoshopworld.com. This is the place where you're going to learn from the most amazing photographers and the most amazing artists in Photoshop, putting it all together for you. So that's one thing we want you to keep in mind. We also want you to keep in mind a website. Take a look at this website, Laura L. Tantawi. Right? I always have to think about it because I don't want to mess up her name. I met her also at Gulf Photo Plus, National Geographic photographer, does a lot of photojournalism work. Phenomenal. I mean, I spend a lot of time on the Photoshop side of it. So to see somebody who's out there that's just shooting and capturing, just running the field, an amazing artist. So I want you guys to be able to take a look at that. A lot of her reportage is phenomenal work there. So that is the website to watch. The last thing that I want you to do is I want you to go to peachpit.com/KelbyOne and enter in the code KelbyOne. You're going to get 40% off a great ebook. All of that information is over at peachpit.com. Now, the last thing, right? 1, 2, 3. Here's the fourth one. Whoa! Somebody's going to win that. What do we have there, Pete?
We've got an umbrella holder and an umbrella, a great light modifier for you working with off-camera flash. It's from Impact, and it's a great little deal. Somebody's going to get this. I love these things. I use these all the time. Make sure you go over to KelbyOne.com/contest.
All right. They select the show.
Right there. Find the show, PT&T.
Put in your name, put in your email, put in your website, put in a comment. Tell us something about this. If you want Brad to do a show specific on auto ISO, say, Brad, come on the show, do auto ISO. Leave it here. We'll be more than happy to be able to cater a show specifically to you guys. So, Mr. Pete Collins, thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you so much for knocking out Aperture Priority and Shutter Priority. And thanks to all of you guys for coming by. We will see you guys next week. Take care.
Bye, guys.